Good. Well, I want to thank everybody here so much for do come on around a bit space for really lively and really practical really practical afternoon. I suppose before opening it to the floor, I'd love to hear from you. What if you've heard things from others that link with your work or link with make you think, oh, that connects, or I could take that further, or just any threads that you've noticed.
So I think I alluded to it at the very end, participation. I generally believe that how we do that is really important. I think one way might be sort of like our characterisation of what our activities are. So as a youth worker, it's always about, okay, how can we actually make it into intergenerational space? So when can young people actually be heard, sort of like within our sort of spaces if we've got young people, and we have kind of cafe church. So it's just like, meeting around an oblong table and having a cup of coffee and, just trying to mix up people so that, the young people are heard. And I think that's a good starting point. So I would definitely think about that. And also just be creative. There's a lot of creativity out there. We can do it sort of like, in ways that surprise us actually. The young people can take the lead. They just need a bit of encouragement, to do it. And talk about relevant stuff, which matters to them. So, yeah.
I'm really interested in the dialogue side of things. I think, and this isn't just about radicalisation or far right, but actually, just in general, we're really rubbish around dialogue and talking around differences, and we, as Christians, can put ourselves in camps. And so I think there's a lot of rich learning for us around how to have conversations well.
Yeah, I think there's something for me around how well we support young people to challenge the status quo, and I think often we can suppress that through our own fear of what that might mean, but actually, there are times when we should really be encouraging them in their non-compliance and supporting them in that.
In Ramadan, Ramadan is coming up. So in Ramadan, especially, most of the Muslims or in the mosque are open to public as well. So you could, if you're local, if there's a mosque around, you can talk about it, you can share food. Normally they offer food as well. So it will be an easy way to engage with them. And it's a good way to engage with especially young people at that time.
Thank you. One of the stories I opened with this morning was about Bristol Cathedral, which opened its doors for an iftar last year. Okay, any thoughts or reflections or comments from those who've stuck with the course and been with us all day?
What is the official transcript?
It's whatever is kind of the dominant kind of narrative in your context. So within our churches there might be a dominant narrative that young people kind of feel obliged to go along with or feel oppressed by, or so it's that dominant kind of narrative that we're kind of sitting under.
Thank you all very much. Well, that was very, very good. Loads of input there. Scribbling notes and everything has been great. I just kind of wanted to ask, in terms of like youth work development, from what I've heard from everyone really, is we were having a chat in the break there. I started out doing youth work in 1997, 98-ish, and we were talking about the development of youth, and I started out in the secular youth services, then sort of progressed wherever. And over those years, over that sort of 3 decades almost, youth work has changed massively, and you spoke a little bit about the youth services like slowly sort of dissipating, and I was in the youth services when that was happening. It was heartbreaking, a lack of funding, and then that opened up new opportunities. So I guess we've seen this kind of, I don't know whether it's a progression or a degression or however you put it, in terms of how youth work has evolved over time. And when I did my JNC training, I remember at the time feeling like, okay, this is it for life. And then all of a sudden things start to crumble. And I suppose the question I'm kind of erring towards, I'm a big person, I advocate for detached youth work a lot. That's my main thing, on estates and those kind of things with gangs and whatnot. Where do you see, in your views, like the future of youth work being? Because I'm like with what you were saying around wanting to professionalise youth work, particularly across Chelmsford Diocese, doing proper JNC stuff, like equipping churches and youth workers to do professional youth work. But I don't know where the money for that comes from. I don't know what the courses are for that. And again, working across interfaith connections as well, big advocate for community organising. But it seems like all these things are operating separately out there, and we're all kind of doing a similar thing, but we're not able to put them together. So I guess, where do you feel like the future is heading, and where's that hope in, let's say another 30 years?
I mean, I think the professional youth work as we know it is very, very practically gone, unless the government has a massive change and chooses to invest. Doesn't mean that we have to lose the standards of professional youth work, so we can still maintain that excellent practice, because it's a rich discipline that has lots to teach us as a church. So for me, I think, maybe the professionalism in one way has gone. I know that they're looking at what different training routes will look like, and so it'll be much more like lifelong learning, I think, will be how it is, that we just continue to develop and to continue to grow in it. And I know the CV have put 60 million towards it, so that's great, and we really hope that is going to literally pay off, but we don't know, do we? Because we don't know how it's going to kind of land. How do you magic up 30,000 people? We really, really are hopeful that will make a difference. It'll make a difference for all of our denominations, although I do have a personal fear that it'll just get everyone out of other denominations into Church of England. It's not a kingdom loss, so I'm okay with it.
I hope not. I hope they don't all end up in the Church of England. That'd be a loss for everyone.
I think for us, from just a quick thing and research perspective, is that there's so many people out there who have capacity to be a youth worker or are already youth working, but don't necessarily recognise themselves as doing that. So part of that, I think, is that people feel there's a growing distance between them and young people and young people's culture, and not understanding the online space or whatever it might be. So in terms of research, it's getting stuff out there so people can understand where young people are at and how to meet them. Also, just somehow, structurally, in terms of the institution of the church, just valuing youth work and actually the gifts that we bring as, all individual members of the body of Christ, the hand, the foot, whatever it is, and actually just building from the bottom up that actually it's valuable what you bring. And yes, we're losing that professionalised aspect of it, but you can still bring something that can be really life-changing, even if it's just for one young person.
100% agree with that. I think it has to be sort of much more grassroots, to be honest, as we see sort of like, funding constraints. But, there are definitely people around that are doing it. And I think it is about sort of like trying to encourage them to continue what they're doing. Because I think, my experience as somebody of faith is that it was one person that was interested in me. And, it was life-changing. And talking to other colleagues said the same sort of thing, So I was actually chatting to a youth worker just a couple of days ago, just talking about growing up on an East London estate. That person was saying that, I wonder how I actually managed to survive. I was resilient. She couldn't necessarily see joy in sort of like that growing up because of all the things that happened to her. But I know that that there was an individual that was very close that was supporting her, and I think it's those grassroots opportunities, maybe mentoring programs. I think I'm a great advocate for mentoring, whether that be a therapeutic mentor role or whether it be like I say, sort of some of the things that churches have established. At the end of the day, that can make a huge difference, I think. So,
I don't want to speak so much. I think it's important that we also, at this point, also mention safeguarding, in the sense of that is giving us a better youth work and a safer youth work than has been in the past. But I also want to acknowledge that there's a cost to it. I in the church that I'm in because a family invited me back to their house for coffee, and those days are kind of gone, and so there's actually a real loss with the safeguarding now, which is right in one way, but I just want to acknowledge that there's a loss of that, and my fear is that we see young people, or the church becomes like a service provision, and I don't mean in terms of a religious service, but we don't treat them like family members because our safeguarding can sometimes prevent that. And I just think we need to probably do a bit more work around actually a theological reflection on safeguarding and regarding hospitality and family, and what does that actually mean without reducing young people to clients.
I'm trying to join some of the dots together from the different groups. So I wrote in my notes earlier, the church needs to be seen to be seen challenging far-right ideology for youth to listen. And then we've got Helen's and team's 10 recommendations for the churches in Britain in terms of trying to challenge right-wing extremism. I'm finding that I've got a bit of a gap between, that all sounds brilliant, but on the ground in a small, quite traditional church, how? I mean, is it take one of these and work through it? Is it help?
I suppose those 10, and I said at the beginning that I don't think they're the only 10, but I think those 10 have been not a bad starter. I offer those to the church, capital C, I think it's down to local church ministers like yourself to work out, well, what's the thing that we need to focus on? What's our particular area? Some of these are appeals, of trans church, like start funding youth work again. That's really a denominational appeal or whatever. But in terms of sort of trying to join the dots today, for me, that sense of cultivating young people who are confident in their own faith, open-hearted towards those who don't share it, curious about others, able to engage in respectful dialogue, critically thinking, embedded in community, know who they are. That seems to me that's the great gift that youth work can offer, which will build resilient young Christians in 100 ways, but in relation specifically to this question, will make them much more resistant to the. We talked this morning about how young people get radicalised, and it's a complex thing, but some of that is definitely exploitative grooming, and young people who are lonely and isolated and vulnerable, and I think that the sorts of youth work that you guys do, it helps make young people resilient to that, resistant to that. But
yeah, I think it's being part of authentic community, and not just being token part of the church congregation, but actually having those real relationships, like Helen's saying, where young people feel they are part of this thing, so they're not looking somewhere else for it.
Thank you. Just a reflection, really. Some of my work takes me into schools. I work as a therapeutic mentor, and that involves sort of a lot of one-to-one work with teenage boys. It's really interesting because what I've observed is that there are, and I'll term the most white young people who are actually really, really struggling, often when they feel they are perceived to be the minority in some of their communities. And what I'm finding is it's so important that those young people actually do have a safe, brave space to operate in with a trusted adult. And I think that's something that I've observed over many, many years, sort of like in the East End, where, the young people kind of like just feel othered. And, and sometimes their own stories are that they have felt sort of like excluded. And it's almost like, where do they go to? Well, they will go to those spaces where people actually are taking them seriously. But we're talking about grooming and everything that goes with that. So I had that only this week with a small group of young people. Now it's interesting, but when they start to look at their own sort of family trees, the reality was that they're white young people, but they've got very different experiences of being white. And I thought, great, let's talk about, let's celebrate your identity, and let's celebrate, what you bring. But they need somewhere to articulate those things. And of course, I know you then get into the realms of safeguarding. I know that that there's obviously a pressure for us to actually refer on. But I that's one thing I want to push back on, because those young people, I hope, are actually finding somebody that they can talk to. And I think there should be more of those. More people that, who can do that, and that's why I would definitely absolutely 100% endorse detached youth work. I'm old school. I still think that is something that is really, really needed still. I know it demands a lot, but yeah.
I've found today brilliant, and I think it's been very well designed in that we started with this fairly academic look at things, and then we went through some really good sort of evidence-based statistical stuff, and then some real frontline experiences. So thank you to all of you. It's been really great. Coming back to the sort of academic side that we started with, the question I wanted to ask is, you've talked a lot about the way that the right wing, the extreme right, are trying to sort of co-opt other channels. Is there a risk of them co-opting academia itself? Is this something we need to be aware of, and can we really always trust stuff that's coming out of respected academic institutions?
So the institution I work at is very conservative, and I don't think I'm saying anything that nobody knows. But I'll say that the simple answer to that is yes. The far right are beginning to co-opt certain sectors of academia, and the problem is that they are very good at raising money. You'll find that the best funded research centres are usually the ones that are peddling a far-right ideology, are peddling resort to arms, for instance, are peddling the downgrading of democracy. And this is problematic. And one of the problems with this is government policy, because one of the things we're measured on within the academy is how much money we raise. And this dark money is making its way into the academy, and it's very problematic, and we do try to fight back against it. But when you're working in a university, which is inherently a very conservative institution anyway, especially when they've been around for 800 years, it becomes a bit of a losing battle. So yeah, that's my 2-4 pennant worth on it.
I think these are always contested spaces, and the extreme right is not the only group trying to take control of academia, but it's certainly one. There's a whole new university being set up in the States with extreme amount of money.
It got talked about earlier that right-wing extremism is obviously linked to conspiratorial views. I did a lot of reading at university about this, and I know that conspiracy is a personality type. It's kind of the desire to know something that others don't. But this is also associated with being religious, as this is somewhat similar. You can kind of see the resemblance, the idea that you know something other people don't know, and you're going in to try and rescue them in a sense, or save them in a sense. I've noticed some young people at my church that have come to faith at the same time as becoming more conspiratorial and right-wing. So my question is, how can we dissociate faith so that when we de-radicalise and encourage less conspiratorial views, we can still preserve their faith and we don't erase that as well?
It's a very good question. We're just thinking about this a minute. Let me acknowledge I'm not sure I've got an answer, but I definitely think this is an issue. And one of the things about the Christian faith is it makes an implausible claim. You know, we know that dead people stay dead. We know that dead people rot, and we've all experienced grief and loss, and those people we love never come back. So the nature of the Christian faith is we believe something that is impossible. And then there is the danger then that we then extend that into believing all sorts of bonkers stuff. So please hear me, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. But what I'm saying is that that there is a danger that is inherent, which doesn't mean it isn't true. How do we do it?
I'm not giving an answer. I just really loved what Youthscape brought in terms of that whole encounter. And actually we've got the Holy Spirit at work as well. And so there is, I'm not trying to be naive here, actually it's God's job at the end of the day. But like that whole sense of actually trusting that the Spirit is at work in people. And that whole thing of actually welcoming the critical questions and encouraging critical thinking in our young people and not being scared of that. It being okay that we don't have the answers, modelling that ourselves. I hear that the young people's desire for the powerful God, but actually a bit of life unto you, you need the vulnerable God as well, don't you? and actually introducing them to the vulnerability of God as well as, I think are all ways in which it might equip young people going forward. So I wouldn't be frightened of being critical and encouraging critical thinking at all, and I'll be very reliant on the Holy Spirit.
And just to not dispute what I said earlier, but to nuance what I said earlier, which is that it is entirely possible to be a very strong critical thinker and a person of faith. And there has been a narrative in the academy, in parts of the academy anyway, for the last 150 years, that actually the only people who are objective are people who don't have faith. And that is an untrue narrative, and one that we really need to grow out of as a guild. We're almost coming to land. Any one last question, or we'll?
Sorry, I'm from East London. I'm a chatter. Can't help it. A few people I've heard, including yourself, talk about community organising, which has been, particularly on the rise. Church where I was last at in Walthamstow, community organising was the big thing, and it all started with issues around social justice. And I realised, particularly then, that young people, are very passionate about issues that affect our planet, that affect our culture, racial justice, all these kind of things as well. We should be. And actually that seems like a really good point where people come together, even people of difference of opinion or belief, etc. Do you feel like, in terms of what we've been talking about today, community organising in terms of, in some kind of secular manner, and as it, I don't know if you've heard of CTC, the Christian... Christian Centre for Theology. That's it. They changed their name recently, and I'll keep getting it wrong. And they do a lot of work around sort of community organising, Citizens UK, and also bringing faith into that. Do you feel like, I don't know, that is an avenue in which, some of this stuff could maybe be explored around, particularly helping young people, as you say, who kind of, trying to wrestle out some of that stuff? Do you feel like that's a thing? Maybe that's an avenue that we could utilise?
So I was at the relaunch of Oxford Citizens, was it last week or the week before? But anyway, it showed to me, that 2-hour session showed to me the power that community organising has to build confidence in our young people and to give them an avenue through which they can work for social justice and give them an avenue through which they can be heard. And there was these two young women got up and spoke about their campaign to bring mental health resources to their school. And they can't have been any more than 16. And to get up and speak in front of a room full of adults about a campaign where they'd raised £200,000, from the council for their school, it was really hopeful, and I could just see how empowering community organising was for them. I feel like I've drunk the I sound like I've drunk the Kool-Aid on community organising, and I haven't. I can be quite critical of it at times. But I would point out as well that people like Neil Jameson and others talk about the influence of Catholic social teaching on community organising and the role that it's played in particular on the Living Wage campaign. So I don't in any way see community organising as something secular. I see it very much as a faith-inspired rather than faith-based organisation that has the power to do a lot of good. So, yeah.
Can I share a story about that?
Just quickly, we had an event in the sanctuary upstairs here in May last year. It was the day of the mayoral assembly. So this was London citizens, a couple of thousand people down at Methodist Central Hall with the mayoral candidates in the run-up to the mayoral election. And we had an event here that was organised by London citizens called Unapologetically Faithful in the public space. And it was an hour of sharing stories of faith from Muslim, Jewish and Christian communities. We had 2 Muslim schools present. We had a lot of young people present from Jewish and Christian faith traditions, more Jewish than Christian, interestingly. And it was a fantastic time of sharing how faith through organising takes shape in public action. And it seems to me that that kind of face-to-face relationality between the faiths does a lot to undermine some of the isolation that goes on within faith groups that tends more towards the kind of radical end that you were talking about with faith groups getting ever more isolated. So I just wanted to share that as a moment of hope from last year.
Thank you. I'm going to say some concluding words, but I want to say thank you to the panel for... Yeah, please take your seats, that's great.